Okay, so the first topic we are going to discuss is going to be executive functioning. Um, your textbook talked about executive functioning in relation to looking at going to drive a car and not having a GPS, right? So that control center, not being able to navigate a situation in a timely manner, not being able to use those cues to adjust. So, um, a lot of times we use executive functioning as a global term. So he has executive functioning issues, or she needs executive functioning, blah blah blah, blah, right? We just throw out that term a lot, executive functioning, but there's a difference between a student actually having executive functioning deficits and something else going on, or they're just not accessing their skills. So, for example, I may look at my husband who doesn't do what I told him to do or reminded him to do 3 times today, but it's not that he has executive functioning difficulties because he can accomplish what he needs to accomplish at work, right? So there's some choice in that sometimes, or I'm just not paying attention. It's not a high interest to me, right? It's not super important at the time. I'm doing something else. Um, and then the other layer of it is we have to consider, is there something else going on? Is it really executive functioning? Um, does the student have something like ADHD, right? And they're really just disorganized. It's not that they don't have executive functioning, meaning they can't actually figure out how to start a task. They don't know how to organize themselves. They are they actually don't have the skill. So we'll talk about what that looks like um, a little bit more. But so we want to just make sure we're careful that we're not using the term unless the student actually has been tested. So students, if they if we're concerned about executive functioning, that would be the only thing we're concerned about. There's probably other concerns in the classroom that are going on for a student to be referred to special education in order to have testing completed. And part of that battery of a comprehensive assessment, which you will discuss in a different class when you talk about assessment, is the school psychologists can look at executive functioning in 2 ways. The first way, and you may have experienced this yourself being in the classroom, is you may have received a rating scale from the school psychologist. Usually the brief is used, and this would be a rating scale, and you would rate, does this sometimes, never happen, often, it's not observed, those kind of things. All different indicators, because the brief also looks at different areas as well as executive functioning. So that's one way to look at, does a student have executive functioning deficits? The problem with that assessment is it's only what we observe in the classroom, right? So the student may be choosing not to, initiate a task, may be choosing to call out because that's what they want to do at the time, right? Not that they can't control that or they don't have the ability to start. Some of those may be choices. Those are hard to tease out. But if as a teacher I'm rating, right, I'm just going to rate on what I see. So the better way to really look at executive functioning is to have the school psychologist complete the NEPSI with the student. So the NEPSI is a neuropsychological screen, and that is actually an assessment where the school psychologist has the students actually perform tasks. And those measures show, can the student actually manage executive functioning type tasks, right? Can I inhibit my behavior? So if something says, if I change the rules to the game and it says, every time that there's a blue square, you need to say yellow. And every time that there's a yellow square, you need to say red. And if there's a green square, you need to say blue, right? That takes a lot of cognitive shift in my brain to remember those rules and to stop myself, to give that inhibition, right? So those are kinds of tasks that we look at to see, does the student actually have executive functioning skills, right? I may ask them to categorize or produce different types of words, and I may look at, do they categorize them? Is it random? How does their brain work in that way? So executive functioning skills are brain related, and as a teacher, I can't necessarily do you not have executive functioning skills, because I have to tease out, are you choosing not to access a skill or do you not have them? So the only way to really decide if a student does not have executive functioning skills is through an assessment. So we use that globally, but the amount of students that have an executive functioning assessment is pretty low. So I just want to caution us when we use executive functioning, we can use it right now to talk about those types of skills, but we want to make sure we're not diagnosing students either. And ultimately, for me, it doesn't matter, right? I'm going to go into a classroom and I don't care if you're choosing not to use a skill or you don't have the skill. I still need to help you, right? All right. So there's a few other pieces that I think when we look at students who have executive functioning type concerns, we also want to look at how, and again, I'm not going to get deep into this because this is more of your assessment class and more actually a school psychologist's job and not a special ed teacher job or even a regular ed teacher job, is looking at some of the other cognitive functionings that students have that may impact their ability to present executive functioning type behaviors, to present organized, to be able to keep up with class, to be able to manage the tasks you're giving them, all of those kinds of concerns that we have with students in our classrooms. So one thing is working memory, and I think your textbook mentioned the working memory area of cognitive functioning. So that's our ability to maintain and manipulate pieces of information. So in a short amount of time. So this may be, right, I'm trying to decode the text, and at the same time, I'm trying to comprehend, right? So those are two tasks that are happening simultaneously. My working memory I have to be able to remember my decoding skills, and then remember now I'm reading, so am I comprehending, and keep shifting those back and forth. The other area that your textbook mentioned that doesn't always come out necessarily in an assessment in this way, but is our inhibition, right? Are we able to control those impulses? And that frequently will come out from our school psychologists. It's not a score necessarily in our cognitive profile, but it is part of the assessment. So looking at, do I have impulse control? Can I stop myself? So when I want to hit the kid next to me, can I actually not control that behavior, right? Because my brain isn't working in that way to stop, right? There isn't that stop gap that most people would have. Right? Again, we have to decide, is it behavior or is it a cognitive function? So I'm not going to just allow every kid to slap the kid next to them because, maybe they have some inhibition problems. Most likely not. Those are more of our more severely impaired students. The other thing that the textbook talked about was cognitive flexibility. And this can be broken down in a bunch of different ways for our students. But the biggest thing is flexible thinking. So when we look at cognitive flexibility, we also look at something called processing speed. And when I look at assessments, right, from our school psychologist, that is one area that I go to very, very quickly. I look at processing speed and I look at working memory because those really, it will impact our cognitive flexibility. So our ability to shift between tasks, right? So I'm a teacher and I am going up to the board, right? I'm writing some notes down, like open this page in your textbook, write this down in your notes. I'm shifting, right? Many times in a classroom. Think of how many times our lessons move from one thing to another, to do this, to log onto the computer, now do this task, right? Work with your friend, turn and talk. All of those types of things are happening very quickly. Even social interaction. So we'll talk about that as well. But when we look at cognitive flexibility, we want to be able to shift between tasks or demands, and many times we'll see students don't have the ability to do that. They need supports in place to do that. So those are other cognitive functioning, right? So I'll go back to processing speed. I don't think I explained that very well. So processing speed is how fast I take information and then do something with it, right? So many of our students who are falling behind in our class, they're not keeping up. You're getting frustrated with them because you had to tell them 3 times, or you're waiting them still for them to get something out of their book bag, right? It takes them so much longer to take in the information that by the time they understand what they're actually supposed to be doing or have processed the information, you've already moved 2 tasks forward. So we have to be careful of that, especially with our students who are special education students in our classroom. We have to look at a bunch of different factors, right? They may have a learning disability, but is their processing speed really slow? That is going to make a big difference in your class as to how quickly or how efficiently they can work in your class. So we have to look at what supports or what ways can we help them. So I'm just going to give one example, and we'll talk about this more after, but if their processing speed is really low, I want them to listen to what's happening in class, and I'm going to give them everything that I'm saying or having someone else write down, right? So I don't care if they're writing down their notes, because they're going to be taking so much time to get the notes down, they didn't hear a darn thing I said. Doesn't matter now it's on their paper, because most of my discussion was probably the most important information for them to hear versus actually the words I was writing on the board. I can give those to the student and they can use them later on, right? So some of the things that we hold on to dearly as teachers, we have to let go of in order for our students to be successful. So that's just one example. I'm going to talk about a lot more in a little bit. But that is executive functioning, I guess the background information of it.